How we doing, Andrew? Welcome to the VT series. Thanks for joining us today, mate.
Pleasure, mate. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, all good. So first of all, Andrew, for those who might not know what you do at Brotherhood Performance and Health, can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got in the industry to becoming a personal trainer and a coach?
Like you said, my name's Andy. So I run Brotherhood Health and Performance. So we are mainly a sort of strength conditioning, performance-based training for combat sports. So we work with like MMA fighters, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athletes, like grapplers, like anything to do with combat sports, really, wrestlers, boxers. Primarily we work with MMA and sort of professional grapplers, but I say we, like it's anyone else, but it's me. I like anyone to do with sort of the combat world is essentially what we work with. I'm also like a personal trainer, so I work with sort of general populations as well. I sort of got in the industry a bit by chance, but a bit by sort of luck again as well. So I was like a semi-decent like rugby player when I was younger. Played rugby league until I was about 17, 18, but a couple of sort of severe injuries sort of forced me out of the game, really. So I'd always been in sport, played sport to a semi-decent standard all my life. Played a bit of everything, really, but was mainly a rugby league player. Went to university, got my degree in sport and exercise science because all I was ever good at was sport. So
standard. Go to uni, do a sport degree.
So I sort of come out of university not really knowing what I wanted to do. I knew that I didn't want to stay in education, and I sort of mulled around a bit for just worked a couple of menial jobs whilst I needed a bit of cash, sort of fresh out of university, and sort of stumbled onto Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Again, that another story through that, but and sort of fortunately, my mum worked in a commercial gym at the time. She just worked in a cafe, and she was like, "There's a job opening going for a personal trainer." So I'd always done a bit here and there with like my mates and stuff like that, and obviously been involved in sort of gym environments my entire life. So I was like, you know what, I'll give it a go, see how I feel. And it basically progressed from there. Sort of worked in the commercial facility, built myself up through that, and then when I sort of decided that I wanted a bit more specialization, I wanted to sort of enhance my career, should I say. As much as I enjoy working with general populations and working in those environments, I wanted to sort of enter into a bit more of a niche and like I said, develop myself professionally. And that's when I started sort of progressing into the strength conditioning world and the performance side of things. And it's basically just stemmed from there, really.
Okay. I know we're going to delve into, obviously, the stuff that you do at Brotherhood and your involvement in mixed martial arts.
Yeah.
I know before lockdown you were doing a bit of general population PTing. Is it David Lloyd you were still at, right?
Yeah.
Alongside your MMA stuff. Just for those out there, what sort of... Well, the differences are obviously going to be quite big, but what sort of differences and challenges do you find when you're going from one client to the other in terms of maybe things like intensity and mentality and things like that? What do you find between your clients?
So there are many differences and there are many similarities at the same time. One of the good things about working with general populations is you learn how to like effectively communicate with people. You learn how to build relationships with people. And it can teach you sort of many great things as a trainer. Like I think when you sort of enhance yourself again, sort of professionally, you get into the higher realms of exercise professionals, and sort of personal trainers can get a bit of a stick or can get looked down upon. But I think personal training and being in those environments is an unbelievable starting point because it teaches you many great things about sort of relationships with people. And if you can't manage sort of Barry, who works in an office 5 days a week, and you're not really going to have success with somebody in a more specialized field. So those learning environments are great, I think. again, for building networks, building relationships with people, and understanding the sort of bare bones of the industry and the sort of the underlying working, the cogs behind the industry, should I say. The differences obviously are the sort of motivating factors for people. So people generally, in general population, it's the majority of people are health related. They're simply looking for, it might be sort of an escape from the sort of real world. They're looking to unwind, things like that. They might be looking to lose a bit of weight, get a little bit stronger, but fundamentally it's all health related. So they want to move better, feel better, those sort of things, look a bit better. When you sort of progress into more specialized or more niche markets, whether it be like people who work with sort of physique individuals, obviously their primary motivation is how they look. But for me, the guys that we work with, they're looking to achieve success through competition. So their driving force tends to be, they're a lot more intrinsically motivated. So obviously the handling of the client becomes a lot more different, because it becomes a bit more of a, rather than a bit of a push up the hill, it becomes a bit more of a management sort of job. We have to manage what they do rather than trying to motivate them to do it, if that makes sense. We're trying to control the things that they're doing rather than pushing them to do certain things.
And how are the two different types of clients you have at the moment dealing? Obviously, during the lockdown, because I know that you'll obviously have some general populations. How are they getting on? But how are those who wanted to? They may have had a target of a competition. And obviously that's probably been scrapped, hasn't it? I'm guessing.
Yeah. Everything's done now. Yeah.
How are they both signing with this? How are you adapting? What you're doing?
So I mean, I've been quite fortunate, and most of my clients have handled it pretty well. My sort of general population's clients are all quite switched on, so they haven't really needed much sort of pushing and motivating. It's been a case of we just adapt to the environment that we've got. They're all quite regularly active people, so whether it's walking or jogging or cycling, or some of them are fortunate enough to have like home gym equipment and things like that. So it's just basically keeping as we would, but obviously there's not the one-to-one contact, so it's just regular check-ins, making sure that they're all right, like physically and sort of mentally as well, and just keeping the ball rolling more than anything, just making sure that they're happy and they're content, and they're still getting the sort of stimulus from the exercise or whatever it may be doing, is that they're getting what they want out of it. When you're working with the more specialized guys, so the athlete side of things or the performance guys, again, this is where it sort of switches, because it now becomes about them, their heads not falling off, essentially. So when they're restricted with what they can do because they do it so well, when they're told that they can't do it, then that's when our problems come, because they have no outsource, essentially. When you're working with general populations, obviously, pretty much like exercise is pretty much exercise. You can sort of justify various different things, but when you've got a guy who wants to hit a punch bag or he wants to spar, things like that, but he can't do that, then that's where we have to sort of, the man management comes in a bit more. And again, it's just been about sort of directing attention to something else. It's sort of been, all right, I know we want to be here, but we're going to do this, and we're going to aim in this direction, so that when we do return, we're going to get this return back to our specific work, if that makes sense.
And how have you been doing that specifically, Andy? I know you've done a few blog posts on your website about keeping Matt ready and keeping perform ready when they get out of lockdown. MMA, and you're rolling around on a mat, aren't you? It's probably going to be one of the last things that people are able to get back into. How are they coping, and what are you doing differently to, essentially keep Matt ready, as we say?
So, I mean, it's an interesting thing, because I've got a few sort of like colleagues, essentially, or like quite a decent network of friends in the industry around the country now, and we sort of obviously talk quite regularly because we're all in similar boats. And the sort of the changing of opinions has adapted and changed as the time's gone on. Fundamentally, what what they actually do isn't overly important at this point in time, because we don't really have anything to work for. We don't know when we're going back. And so the underlying themes of it all has just been, it's just work capacity stuff essentially. So we're just trying to get them as in a good as in an optimal physical point. So when we return to sort of normal activities, they're good to go. Essentially, they're physically about as ready to go as they possibly can be. So that comes in the form of sort of, we do sort of extensive plyometrics, so sort of low intensity plyometric work. Again, all of this is dependent on what equipment they have available. But generally sort of extensive plyometric work, just sort of keeping the joints and everything functioning, and it's good tissue prep essentially. Then we might implement some tempo work, so you can use like isometrics that are great for sort of neural stimulus, but obviously they're sort of not as fatiguing on like muscular structures. Again, like work capacity circuits, so just basic circuit work, plenty of aerobic capacity work, so jogging, cycling, that sort of stuff, whatever they've got access to. If they have the fortune of having maybe like a punch bag at home, then obviously you can implement a bit more specific work in there. But generally, it's just been about keeping them moving, keeping them going. Someone put it as like, it's like horsepower training. You're just building that ability for them to work essentially, and building their sort of robustness to exercise. So it's all been quite simple, really. There's not been anything that's overly fancy. It's just been whatever they need. Maybe they're sort of rehabbing some injuries and things like that have built up over time. It can vary person to person, really, but the underlying theme has been that improve the work capacity, focus on their sort of general robustness to physical training, and just building up their ability to sort of recover from that.
And I know you would have kept, you would have retained a lot of your clients anyway, the performance-based guide, those for the mixed martial arts. Have you seen maybe an increase in more like the, how would you say, someone who just participate, goes down to Alley Cats, for example, their MMA training, BJJ have been, go down to the gym 2-3 times a week, have a role. They wouldn't really do any specific training on top of that. Have you seen that because people can't get into the gym to have a role, they've then come to you, or, come to guys like you to get more specific training? Have you seen that?
I've not noticed it massively. I mean, when we went into lockdown, I didn't want to use the time to sort of actively seek more clients. I wanted to use the time to sort of focus on the ones that I've already got, rather than sort of running around like in a whiz, like trying to sort out new clients and go through everything and explain all the things we're going to do. I wanted to spend my time focusing on the ones that I've already got, because obviously things can because people are stressed, and when we first went into lockdown, obviously there was a big sort of panic around the whole situation, and like personally, I didn't want to take too much advantage of that. I didn't want to start selling them like shit programs that are just not very effective, or they're just sort of panic written. So I wanted to invest my time in how I can serve the clients that I've already got better. And obviously invest a bit more time into them, because managing them in a normal routine is quite easy, but obviously in the unknown, it becomes a bit more challenging. So I wanted to make sure that I had the time for each individual. But from what I know, I don't know if there's been a massive surge of sort of online trainers. But I was quite fortunate that I already had online systems set up in place. So I didn't need to make a massive transition. So from what I know, I don't think there's been a massive surge in more specific work. So like guys looking for more performance-based trainers or coaches. From my point of view, and from the people I speak to, I don't think it's been massive, but there probably is out there. There's probably people who have benefited from the current climate. But I know personally, I just wanted to focus on the quality for the people that I already have.
I think that's quite interesting you saying that. Obviously, I just thought that may have been the case. Obviously, not being an insider in the sport. And that kind of leads on to one of the questions really wanted to ask you today was, it seems that everyone's into BJ. I feel like everyone does BJ or something like that. You know, it's massive increase in the last 5 to 10 years, really, hasn't it? You know, at that participation level, you know, just and stuck into it. And I think we might have talked about this before we've had a coffee, Andrew, about, you know, the difference between those who are right at the top in terms of their training and their sort of programs that they get, and those who go to the local gym and have a role. And probably what you've just said then is kind of, you know, just back that up really. What are your thoughts on the training and the programming that goes into the sport as a whole at the moment, outside of the top level? Is it still, as we just said, people go to the gym and it's predominantly technique, predominantly rolling, it's predominantly, you know, this is what you need to do, rather than the gym and the, you know, the conditioning?
I mean, there's, again, it is quite a tough question to answer. It's quite an open-ended question and there's sort of many routes you could go down. Overall,
sorry, I'll ask a better one then.
No, it's fine. It's quite tough because in MMA it's a bit better because obviously in MMA you're primarily looking to compete and to fight. Not many people get into MMA just for a hobby. So with jiu-jitsu is the opposite. So probably 80% of the population who grapple and do all this stuff haven't got an interest in competing. Mm-hmm. If you go to like my gym, for example, the gym that I train at, we probably have you could roughly 100 members, and there's probably 10 of those that compete on a regular basis. So straight away from my personal viewpoint, 90% of the population aren't interested in competition. Mm-hmm. So that poses the question of the problem we have is then obviously when a larger population is not interested in competing, the majority of the training is going to be based around the non-competitors, if that makes sense, because they make up the majority population. It's the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, doesn't it? So, in that point of view, it becomes challenging to make training more optimal for competitors, if that makes sense. And again, down a bit of a rabbit hole, but this is one of the problems we have in this country. So, like the UK produces some like really, really good top level guys, but when you compare them to like the guys in the States and over in Brazil, we're quite behind. And that I fundamentally think that's because we don't have like sort of specialized training facilities. So they're like some of these, so basically for those who don't know, everyone competes under team names essentially. So generally speaking, it's the name of your gym or the affiliate that gym comes with. So you've got like gyms in America that are these massive organizations, massive affiliates, and they're basically like Olympic training centers. So everyone that goes there pretty much is someone who's looking to be successful in the sport of jiu-jitsu or grappling or whatever the sport may be. And due to sort of the infrastructure over in this country, we don't have that fortune because people have to work most of the time. They can't afford to train full time. So it poses a question of how do we sort of get from this point that we're at now into more sort of elite levels. And don't get me wrong, we've got some guys coming through and some women as well. The women are actually better than the men typically in competition wise over in the UK. But it's a fine balance. So from a strength conditioning side point, the sport is actually quite far behind. Mm-hmm. For some reason, it's a sport that maybe because it's quite a niche sport, they love fads. So the next, like, I guess it's like anything, isn't it? The next class or the next whatever it is, people seem to jump on that bandwagon. So part of my job, a big part of what I see as my role is education. It's trying to put out relative content and relative information for these people to use. But so from that point of view, we are quite far behind. Even in MMA as well, that is, again, quite far behind. And again, there's a much further discussion we could go on to from that. But the overall sort of understanding of how you should train is quite low, really. And it's getting better. There are good guys across the UK now that are starting to develop, some really smart guys that are really pushing this good information, and some really good coaches out there. But obviously 5 people against the whole population, it takes a long time to break through. So the short answer is it's not very good at the minute. It's getting better, but it's still a long way off yet.
Okay. So I think you mentioned it there. How are you looking then to kind of tap into those who are looking to perform? Because I know you do a bit of like sponsorship stuff, don't you?
Yeah.
If you want to speak about that. But how are you kind of looking to tap into that market, as being a trainer? In your own business?
Yeah. So again, I mean, it's a bit of a marketing question more than anything. It's a tough one to do because it's something, especially I think most trainers will go through, because obviously, as much as we are trainers, marketing and those sales portions is still part of the job. So it can be a tough one to do. So like I said, my big focus is always education. So trying to put out good information that people will hopefully like learn something from and respond to. And again, build a relationship through that, whether they ask questions, things like that can build the relationship, obviously, that with people that are on the other end of the country that I'll never probably meet. So again, this is something that me and like colleagues talk about in terms of how we can tap into the market, because what you typically find is you're always very limited to the circle of people that you know. So if I like look at my social media, for example, my reach will probably like be very northwest centered. So like Manchester, Liverpool, all the people that I know essentially in the sort of community. Whereas I've got a friend, Chris, he's like strength and conditioning coach in Birmingham. So his reach will be very isolated in Birmingham, and the same for another friend called Ben who lives in Wales. So it's the problem we face is how do we increase that reach to the rest of the country, if that makes sense. And it's a tough question, and I'm not quite sure I actually know the answer, to be honest. It's something that I think about quite a lot. How can I sort of increase my reach and increase my sort of audience, essentially, so that I can a run my business, but help more people in the community, because that's quite an important thing to me. So like I said, I put out loads of content on social media, loads of videos, instructionals surrounding training topics. Obviously sponsorships. So I sponsor a few up and coming guys that might not necessarily have the resources to support themselves, that maybe they're young and they're sort of working part-time. So they don't have massive amounts of money. They basically pay the gym fees. But they want to get to a certain point. So I'll sponsor guys in gyms, and just generally sort of, obviously I compete myself as well, which is also a great way of sort of putting your name out, because people tend to be a bit more trustworthy of people who sort of live the life.
Sorry, I was going to ask about that in terms of being an insider in the sport. Do you think that does give you, a better standing in terms of when you are picking up clients?
100%. And I don't think, from a personal view, I don't think it should be necessary. But I think when you sort of looking at building buy-in and trust with people, it plays a massive factor. I don't think it's always a sign of a good coach. I don't think it should be necessary. There are many, many good coaches out there that don't live this sort of lifestyle, that are really, really fantastic coaches. But from my point of view, it's definitely helped in terms of client acquisition. But it's a tough one, the sort of the whole sort of increasing your reach and marketing side of things. And it's especially when you're in a niche environment, especially in a sport that's very much built on relationships and trusts and loyalty as well to certain gyms. It's something that is tough, and again, something that I ponder about quite a lot, and I don't exactly have a brilliant answer for you, I'm afraid.
In terms of that then, so a lot of personal trainers, especially those who are trying to get in the industry too, getting clients is the biggest thing. You've got to grow your business.
Yeah.
That's the number one priority, really.
Yeah.
And you see, the content, everyone puts content out, trying to educate, and then they have sales funnels and like free giveaways and all this sort of stuff. And you hear and see about, paying people for like lead generation and like, sort of all this sort of stuff. Have you ever considered that? And do you think that would work in your niche? Do you think that them sort of general population techniques to get clients would transfer well?
So there are some that work very well.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously the sort of content creation and that sort of the sort of more social media side of things, where it's more content creation, I don't know, exercise videos, things like that. That there is sort of validity in that and application within that. One of the problems, like I said before, is people in our community are quite stuck in their ways within the community, if that makes sense. And it's not a bad thing, but what it means is they're very trustworthy to people they know.
Mm-hmm.
So the sort of martial arts, and I hate using that word, but the martial arts community is very sort of closed off. It's very protective of its own.
Tribal.
So it's very good at expelling sort of fakes from the industry. So, but because there are large amounts of shit in the industry, for want of a better word, they become very protective and very untrustworthy. So it takes a while to sort of build up that trust with people. So what you do find is a large portion of your clients come from places you've visited. So it's people you know, essentially. So people you've met. You might, like, I travel around a lot, go and train at loads of different gyms. So a large portion of my clients come from either people that I've met or referrals from those places, if that makes sense. So it's the sort of standard lead generation funnels, they have application, but at the same time, our industry is very much built on trust in the sort of combat sports community. And generally speaking, it'll be somebody that you have met or you know or have built a rapport with. The sort of standard. I always think that sort of physique coaches are quite fortunate because their sort of marketing is built off images. So it's like, this is what they look like before and this is what they look like now when working with me. But we don't really have that fortune. I mean, I could say, oh, this person's won this competition, but fundamentally my role hasn't. I mean, it obviously played a factor, but him going out and fighting for the result is what has caused that success. So I can't really be like, oh, this is what he looked like before the fight and this is what he looked like after the fight, because it doesn't really work like that, if that makes sense. So it's the marketing side of things is quite an interesting thing and something that I need to spend more time learning about, to be honest. It's one of probably my biggest downfall is the whole sort of lead generation side of things. It's something that I need to invest a bit more time into myself personally.
And I think just on that point, it's pretty interesting. I've just got my head kind of ticking over there. I've been thinking it for a while. We talked about, the participation levels are massive in BJJ, for example.
Yeah.
Competing that. It is very, don't want to compete. 90% don't want to compete. Just want to go have a roll, enjoy themselves. Then you've got that small percentage for performance-based.
Yeah.
Which is much more about sport, performance, conditioning, which in other sports would be its own role. So if it was a professional conditioner, wouldn't they, essentially?
Yeah.
Do you think the sport and, trainers like yourself are probably stuck in that middle ground where 90% are participation who just want to have a role, so they just want maybe PT, that sort of stuff. And there's a small percentage which you want to really get into, but is the sport funded enough to have so many conditioners? And, am I right in thinking that? Do you think that that's maybe the
similar? Yeah. So
at the moment,
you're on the right path.
Mm.
One of the problems we face is so the funding in jiu-jitsu comes from the individuals themselves. So it's not like if you look at MMA, most MMA fighters are skint, right? Because they just all they do is fight. So until you're pretty much in the top 10 of the UFC, and if anyone's thinking of fighting MMA, until you're in the top tier of the UFC, you're probably going to make no money. So MMA doesn't have any funding. Jiu-jitsu's okay because it is an amateur sport, so everybody has to work. So there is money within the sport. And the problem is so most sports that people know of, so football, rugby, any Olympic sport, so like judo and wrestling, although their combat sports are Olympic sports, they all have like grassroots programs. So if you like for yourself, for example, so obviously you play a pretty good level of rugby league. So when you were younger, you'd have been picked up by a team. That team will have given you the resources that they wanted to give you, wouldn't they? So you might get access to strength conditioning coaches. A nutritionist might come in and talk to you. You've got your sort of skill-based coaches or your head coaches, and you develop through the ranks. And if you were good enough, you then get picked by a professional squad, sign your professional contract, and that's your development, isn't it? You don't really have to learn anything. You just turn up, they tell you what to do, and you go.
Yeah.
Because we have no grassroots development in MMA or jiu-jitsu, it's very much a free-for-all. So you can get people that start the sport at like 30 years old that have had no athletic background whatsoever, just looking to do something other than go to the gym. Like we talked about, the 90% population that don't want to compete or have come from non-athletic backgrounds. So obviously their understanding of actual training and how to be a bit more healthier and exercise. I mean, I've got clients, although I am essentially my aim is to work with performance-based coaches. I've got quite a few that are just that part of that 90% that just want to be a bit healthier, a bit fitter on the mats, because they fundamentally love training jiu-jitsu or whatever it may be. They love doing that, so they want to stay as healthy as they possibly can. But because we don't have that grassroots development, we don't have the sort of the information to these people from an early age. So if you've taken if we had, let's say at 12 years old, you've got coaches going in to talk to kids about how they can start to include some strength conditioning work, how they can put nutrition, how important their nutrition can be. Then when by the time they hit sort of 20 and they're ready to compete at higher levels, they've got that basic understanding in there and they know what they have to do. I've got a friend of mine he's a friend, but he's a physio as well. And he works at, I've told this story a few times, but he's a physio for one of the UK sort of higher MMA teams, top MMA teams. They've got like a couple of UFC fighters, a couple of Cage Warriors fighters. Like they've got guys at the top level of the sport. And he said there's two guys, so both of them fight in the UFC. One of them was a GB wrestler when he was younger, and the other one was just fought Muay Thai. So obviously one's had like a grassroots development, and one's just basically just done what his coaches have told him. No real understanding of sort of sports science, essentially. And he says now they're at the top level, one of them will just go and do the strength conditioning because it's what they've always done. They know what foods they've got to eat. They know that they have to do this to get fitter, to get stronger. Whereas the others had to go and seek out that information. And it's only now he's got to the top that he's like, oh shit, I sort of need to do a bit here, really. Don't I need to get a bit stronger and a bit faster? So I think that lack of sort of grassroots development within the sports is one of the limiting factors, because kids are not developing the sports that new, that we haven't really got many people that have started it from a young age and developed all the way through and turned into coaches. Obviously there are some, but a large portion of especially in the UK, started the sport when they were already sort of 20 to 25. So they're already past that age of how do I look after myself? Like even if I'd have started without doing the background that I sort of had in terms of education, I because of the sort of position that I'd been in earlier life playing sport, I'd have had a general understanding of how to get fitter, how to eat relatively well. I know I need to get enough sleep, things like that. But if you don't have that education from sort of an early age, then as you progress through the ranks, the education isn't there. So it's something that we as coaches take on the responsibility of. Right, we need to educate these people as much as we need to train them at the same time.
Obviously MMA it's a massive field, isn't it? Like you said, you've got jiu-jitsu, different types of jiu-jitsus, you've got your Muay Thai, you've got wrestling, you've got things like that, haven't you? In the umbrella term.
Yeah.
Is there any change at the moment in terms of, because UFC is getting bigger and bigger every year, isn't it? Everyone watches UFC now.
Yeah.
Have you seen any change, or in terms of your own gym, in terms of the local area, do you get kids classes on now? Is there any sort of pathway for them? And when I say the pathway, is it just done by the gym, or is there a governing body in the UK for BJJ, or is it just purely gym based pathway essentially?
So there is the UK BJJ, which is like a governing body, but it's not really like it's that small that it doesn't really play an effect in sort of the development. In MMA, there's a few guys. So there's a fighter out of Liverpool called Dean Garnett, and he's really pushing the sort of youth development side of mixed martial arts. So really trying to build up that sort of that pathway for kids to start competing when they're relatively young and sort of build themselves up. There's Chris Meyer, again, who I mentioned is a friend in Birmingham. And I think post-isolation, that's what he's going to be pushing, is this sort of youth development and grassroots programs in mixed martial arts. But it's very much down to an individual basis. There is no sort of governing body that's overseeing how, like, there's no like RFL, for example, that's like, oh, this is how you need to run your clubs. It's very much based on individuals that are sort of putting themselves out there and being like, I want to run this youth development system, essentially.
Okay. And you spoke about your colleague there down in Birmingham, and obviously your other colleagues that you kind of meet up with. I presume it's on Zoom at the moment.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else who might be more experienced than yourself, Andy, like who's kind of leading it in the country, you know, where you guys look up to and they're kind of like really driving that sort of scene, the performance scene, outside of obviously the UFC, the high-end country?
So the UK is still quite behind in terms of the development of combat sports performance training. But there's a core group of us that are like sort of really trying to push the ways for the future. But there's a guy called William Wayland who runs a gym called Powering Through down in Essex, and he's sort of like the sort of godfather of UK sort of MMA S&C. He's been doing it for a long time. I mean, he works with like the what's it called, the golf tour. I don't know, he basically works with like really the high level golfers, essentially, like the ATP tour. Is that tennis? I don't know. But that sort of organisation.
Yeah.
So he's sort of the godfather, but then there's like people like myself, Chris Meyer, who I've mentioned, Ben Robson. He's like he's doing his PhD down in Wales. So obviously he's a really, really smart, intelligent guy coming through the ranks. There's a guy called Rhys Jones. Again, he's Welsh. Let me try and think. Henry Pike is a guy down south. So there is a good core of people who are sort of trying to really push the ceiling, essentially, from the performance world. But again, a large portion of the information and authority on the subject comes from America. They've got like the UFC PI, which is like the UFC Performance Institute is something that the UFC spent millions on, basically investing in the performance side of training. So they're putting out brilliant information and resources now. But you've got guys all over the US primarily, but the UK is getting there. I think there's a bright future for the sort of strength conditioning world in the UK. There's some really good guys that are coming through and taking their time to invest in these sports solely, rather than saying, oh, I'm going to go work with the rugby team, but then every now and again a fighter that wants to come through, I'll help them. There are guys that are like specialising in these sports and really trying to, like I said, raise the ceiling for the growth.
Is that something that you want to personally pursue, you know, as you get older? Is that the sort of, you want to move just purely into performance, you know, type training? Are you looking to, you know, do any more sort of official conditioning, you know, accreditation and stuff like that? Is that something that you want to get into, or, you know, have you got other plans at the moment?
So I would love for my primary job to be working in athlete development. However, I love working with general populations as well. I think they're brilliant. You build some great relationships, great like clients become friends. You know what I mean? It's a really good environment to be in. I'd never shun that opportunity so as much as I want to help guys get to the top of their game, I also love helping general populations as well. Again, that's first and foremost what you get into these sort of the business or the industry for. Is helping people improve themselves, whether it be somebody going to go fight in the UFC or whether it's just helping Gillian from down the street climb the stairs. Do you know what I mean? Like that's as important to me as it is helping someone get to the UFC. So I still want to, for as long as I can justify it or have time to do it, work with general populations. I was actually due to sort of sit my CSCS, so my like certified strength conditioning qualification, but obviously that's not gone ahead. So that'll be, tail end of the year, start next year. But yeah, so obviously any plans that I had in terms of accreditations or courses have all been put on hold now. So I've got no immediate plans for the future. I'm not a big believer in like paperwork. I don't think qualifications make you any better of a coach. Like, I know guys that have gone on to do master's degrees and some going to PhDs, and it doesn't make you any better of a coach, I don't think. But there are certain things that are good to just tick a few boxes. Some people, obviously, if you learn better through courses, then that's a good resource for you to do. Me personally, I've never been great in educational settings. So most of my time has been like learning through my own resources, like reading books, the sort of like networks and things like that. Like I said, speaking to people is great. Just going and having a conversation with people, you can learn a lot through that. So like I said, I never invested massive amounts in like adding letters to my name, if that makes sense. But you should always be continually trying to learn and to push, whether that's through like you might get mentorships or internships, and like I said, having conversations, reading books, things like that. I'm always that. It's a constant progression. So like I said, the next one I'll try and when I get the sort of go ahead will be the sort of CSCS one. But other than that, I've not got any immediate plans for now.
No, that's a good point, to be fair. Obviously you do need specific quals, to get them done, and so you can operate in terms of a PT or an S&C coach, like you're doing it officially. But yeah, it's all about other humans, mate, isn't it? It's all about just feeding off people and actually learning the job. So definitely echo that. Just on last point, really, on your MA stuff and how that interacts with your general populations. 2 questions on it. One, do you ever get people who want to work with you generally in the David Lloyd gym because they know you're the guy who does the MMA stuff with the athletes? And then second point would be, do you ever chuck in some MMA combat sort of training exercises, little tweaks to the general population? And if you do they like it?
So most people, I don't tend to talk about it much in the commercial facility at David Lloyd.
Why is that?
Because I don't know. Without sounding big-headed, I'm not a very big-headed person, so I don't know. It's I don't talk about it a lot. That is sort of that David Lloyd, like general populations, are very much there to help them and facilitate them as a trainer. I don't like to talk. I don't want to be like, oh, I'm this guy. I've got these medals on my wall, and I work with this person who's done this. Do you know what I mean? It's I like having a bit of a. It's like having a bit of a secret. Do you know what I mean? And when people find out, they're like, oh shit, really? Like, so I try and keep them separate because I like to. When I'm at David Lloyd, I want to do my job as best as I can as a personal trainer in that environment. Obviously, there are correlations, and the information that I learn through Brotherhood massively affects my personal training. But I'm not like, oh, this is me, I do this on the outside. Obviously my clients know because I talk to them about general life, but I don't use that as a marketing or a sales strategy at David Lloyd. But yeah, you have guys that come and speak to you because obviously other people talk. But it's mainly sort of like pad sessions and things like that. You hold pad for people. I use all most people would be quite surprised. The sessions that I do with the fighters are very similar to what I do with the general population. It's basic. I'm a big believer in keeping things as simple as possible. There are many ways to skin a cat, but the fastest way or the most efficient way is normally the best way, isn't it? So we do the same things. We squat, we hinge, we press, we pull. There might be certain tweaks, like we might do more jumping with the athletes and more ballistic work and things like that. But generally speaking, the sessions are pretty similar. They're very goal orientated. But fundamentally, most strength sessions or programs look very similar. I'm not a big believer in like these mad like hit sessions, like things like that. So I don't really use them. I know what I do and I try and do that as best as I can.
Okay. Nice one. Yeah, it was just something that I wanted to just ask you really, because I can imagine people picking your brains if they knew all the time, trying to get stuck into you. Nice one, Andy. Covered loads of bits there, loads of stuff about obviously the scene in the UK that's really interesting. Your experience in terms of training the different types of athletes and things like that. Really, really great bits in there. Last of all, then, what we like to ask everyone who comes on the VC series is those who are wanting to get in the industry, whether that be a conditioner or a PT. What are your 3 pieces of advice for those looking into the industry now?
I mean, now, fucking hell. At the minute.
Well, general. There's going to be a big boom anyway in a few weeks.
It's a tough one. It's not. I'll go. The first one's a bit of. You've got to be patient, but I'll elaborate a little bit. In the perfect world, as a PT, I think everyone should do like a year of like an internship. Obviously, you get getting paid, but I think you learn so much in that first year. Everyone sort of comes in and they've got like all this knowledge that they've learned from courses or things that they know online or they've learned online, reading books, etc. But you learn so much more about people in that first year that I think there should be the industry. It will never happen because obviously if you go and work for commercial facilities, they want you to make money for them. But in an ideal world, you'd spend a year just on a gym floor, getting to know people, building relationships with people and learning how to communicate with people and train people on a one-to-one. But if you have the position to be as patient as possible and not have to worry too much about income to begin with, then I'd do that. Obviously, you need to be patient because so many people fall out this industry within like the first 12 months because they might not be making enough money. It might not be what they thought it was going to be. So be patient is your first one, because there's so much to learn in that first sort of 12 months that if you don't see that through, then that's when all the shit times will generally happen. So try and just get through that 12 months, be patient, and you'll progress from there. The second one is just continuously learn, and don't assume you know anything about exercise or fitness. So you see so many people that come into the doors like swinging the big dicks, thinking they're the bee's knees because they've been lifting weights for a few years. But there's so much to learn to do with exercise, and there are much more qualified, much more educated, better coaches, better trainers out there. Don't stop learning. As soon as you stop learning and assume you know everything, then you've had it. You've just put a complete plateau in your development as a trainer, as a coach, whatever you want to be, whether you just want to be a personal trainer, whether you want to progress into like strength conditioning, or you want to go into a nutritionist, or you want to be work with like physique athletes and bodybuilders and prep coaches, things like that. And you should always invest time into yourself and your development as a coach, whether that be through education or whether it be courses like we talked about, accreditations, business courses. They're a big thing. But I think you should always continue sort of professional development. So number one, be patient. Number two is like, don't stop learning. And number three, I'd say is always be yourself. Is you'll there are many sort of flashing objects in the fitness industry, whether it be the next best exercise or the next best thing. But if you are yourself and you're not I'm quite, like I speak to people like I'll speak to you right now. Like I'm not like, hey guys, do you want to go and do 10 minutes of abs? Like, do you know what I mean? Like it's just not my style. And it was something that I've always stuck to. And people will try and push you and pull you in certain ways when you first start the industry. And I think you need to just be yourself, stick to your sort of your morals, essentially your ethics, and be you, because people will like you for you. Clients will like you for who you are, not who you're pretending to be. And eventually you might be all singing or dancing when they first meet you, but when you have a bad day and you can't be arsed, you've got to be yourself, and that'll shine through. So I'm a big believer in always being yourself. Stick to what you believe in, stick to what you know, and don't let people push you and pull you around. Make sure you stand up for yourself. because there are certain pitfalls in the fitness industry that people don't see. People try and force you to do classes and things like that you might not necessarily be comfortable with doing, or you might not necessarily want to do them. Like, I'm not, I don't, as much as I work in a commercial facility, I don't teach any fancy classes and things like that, because it's not me. It's not what I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a massive believer in them. Other than if that's what makes people happy, then let them do it. But for me personally, it's not my thing. So I don't do them. So I was always wherever I've worked, I've always been very upfront and very honest about what is it I do and what I want to get from clients and what I want clients to get from me. So be patient is number one. Number two is like continuously sort of progress, keep learning, developing as a coach and not an athlete, as a coach and as a trainer. And number three is just be yourself, and don't let people try and tell you what you have to and have not to do. This is a great example at the minute, because you're getting so many people that are just going online and Instagram, and everyone's now an online coach, and sort of claiming, oh, this is clients' results and things like that. This is my online clients' results, where they're just the person they're seeing 3 times a week in the gym. They're just pretending it's an online client. So I guess that'd be the fourth one, is just don't get caught up in fads, really.
It's no, perfect. Cheers, Andy. That was some real good bits of insight there. I think just on that third point about being yourself, I think that's massive. Like you say, not everyone's going to like you, but those who like you will like you for what you're offering, what your service is. You know what I mean? As long as you're consistent with that service and this is what you stand for. As you said, you don't need 100 face-to-face clients, do you? You know what I mean? You're not you don't have enough time for that. Yeah. So you will have enough of those who want to be taught by you and trained by you. You know, it's a great point. And I think it is a very valuable point for people who are looking to get into the industry. But I really appreciate that, Andy. Loads of bits in there, mate. So thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed it. You got to give us a bit of an education there about the UK scene.
Yeah, my pleasure, mate. I apologise to anyone who's listening who doesn't have a fucking clue what I'm going on about. But yeah, hopefully some people can take a little bit from it. Then I hope it's helped a bit.
That was perfect. Cheers, mate. I'll catch you soon.
Yeah, pleasure, mate. Thanks for having me.